Jane Eyre, Chapter 20. I had forgotten to draw my curtain, which I usually did, and also to let down my window blind. The consequence was, that when the moon, which was full and bright, came in her course to the space in the sky opposite my casement, and looked in at me, through the unveiled panes, her glorious gaze roused me. Awakening in the dead of the night, I opened my eyes on her disk, silver white and crystal clear. It was beautiful, but too solemn. I half rose and stretched my arm to draw the curtain. Good God! What a cry! The night, its silence, its rest, was rent in twain by a savage, a sharp, a shrilly sound that ran from end to end of Thornfield Hall. My pulse stopped, my heart stood still, my stretched arm was paralyzed. The cry died, and was not renewed. Indeed, whatever being uttered that tearful shriek could not soon repeat it. Not the widest winged condor of the ends could, twice in succession, send out such a yell from the cloud shrouding his ire. This thing delivering such utterance must rest here it could repeat the effort. It came out of the third story, for it passed overhead. And overhead, yes, in the room just above my chamber ceiling, I now heard a struggle, a deadly one it seemed, from the noise, and a half-smothered voice shouted, "Help! Help! Help!" 3 times rapidly. "Will no one come?" it cried, and then, while the staggering and stamping went on wildly, I distinguished through plank and plaster, "Rochester! Rochester, for God's sake, come!" A chamber door opened. Someone ran or rushed along the gallery. Another step stamped on the flooring above, and something fell, and there was silence. I put on some clothes, though horror shook all my limbs. I issued from my apartment. The sleepers were all aroused. Ejaculation, terrified murmurs sounded in every room. Door after door unclosed. One looked out, and another looked out. The gallery filled. Gentlemen and ladies alike had quitted their beds, and, "Oh, what is it? Who's hurt? What has happened? Fetch a light! Is it fire? Are there robbers? Where shall we run?" was demanded confusedly on all hands. But for the moonlight, they would have been in complete darkness. They ran to and fro. They crowded together. Some sobbed, some stumbled. The confusion was inextricable. "Where the devil is Rochester?" cried Colonel Dent. "I cannot find him in his bed." "Here, here," was shouted in return. "Be composed, all of you, I'm coming." And the door at the end of the gallery opened, and Mr. Rochester advanced with a candle. He had just descended from the upper story. One of the ladies ran to him directly. She seized his arm. It was Miss Ingram. "What awful event has taken place?" said she. "Speak! Let us know the worst at once." "But don't pull me down or strangle me," he replied, for the Misses Ashton were clinging about him now, and the 2 dowagers, in vast white wrappers, were bearing down on him like ships in full sail. All's right, he cried. "It's a mere rehearsal of Much Ado About Nothing, ladies. Keep off, or I shall wax dangerous." And dangerous he looked. His black eyes darted sparks. Calming himself by an effort, he added, "The servant has had the nightmare, that is all. She's an excitable, nervous person. She construed her dream into an apparition, or something of that sort, no doubt, and has taken a fit with fright. Now then, I must see you all back into your rooms, for till the house is settled, she cannot be looked after. Gentlemen, have the goodness to set the ladies the example. Miss Ingram, I'm sure you will not fail in evincing superiority to idle terrors. Emmy and Louisa, return to your nests like a pair of doves, as you are. Mesdames, you will take hold to a dead certainty, if you stay in this chill gallery any longer." And so, by dint of an alternate coaxing and commanding, he contrived to get them all once more enclosed in their separate dormitories. I did not wait to be ordered back to mine, but retreated unnoticed, as unnoticed as I had left it. Not, however, to go to bed. On the contrary, I began and dressed myself carefully. The sounds I had heard after the scream, and the words that had been uttered, had probably been heard only by me, for they had proceeded from the room above mine, but they assured me that it was not a servant's dream which had thus struck horror through the house, and that the explanation Mr. Rochester had given was merely an invention framed to pacify his guests. I dressed, then, to be ready for emergencies. When dressed, I sat a long time by the window, looking out over the silent grounds and silver fields, and waiting for I knew not what. It seemed to me that some event must follow the strange cry, struggle, and call. No, stillness returned. Each murmur and movement ceased gradually, and in about an hour, Thornfield Hall was again as hushed as a desert. It seemed that sleep and night had resumed their empire. Meantime, the moon declined. She was about to set. Not liking to sit in the cold and darkness, I thought I would lie down on my bed, dressed as I was. I left the window and moved with little noise across the carpet. As I stooped to take off my shoes, a cautious hand tapped low at the door. "Am I wanted?" I asked. "Are you up?" asked the voice I expected to hear, my master's. "Yes, sir." "And dressed?" "Yes." "Come out then, quietly." I obeyed. Mr. Rochester stood in the gallery, holding a light. "I want you," he said. "Come this way. Take your time and make no noise." My slippers were thin. I could walk the matted floors as softly as a cat. We glided up the gallery and up the stairs, and stopped in the dark, low corridor of the fateful third story. I had followed and stood at his side. "Have you a sponge in your room?" he asked, in a whisper. "Yes, sir." "Have you any salts, volatile salts?" "Yes." "Go back and fetch both." I returned, sought the sponge on the washstand, the salts in my drawer, and once more retraced my steps. He still waited. He held the key in his hand, approaching one of the small black doors he put in the lock. He paused and addressed me again. "You don't turn sick at the sight of blood?" "I think I should not. I have never been tried yet." I felt a thrill while I answered, but no coldness and no faintness. "Just give me your hand," he said. "It will not do to risk a fainting fit." I put my fingers into his. Warm and steady was his remark. He returned the key and opened the door. I saw a room I remember to have seen before, the day Mrs. Fairfax showed me over the house. It was hung with tapestry, but the tapestry was now looped up in one part, and there was a door apparent, which had then been concealed. This door was open. A light shone out of the room within. I heard thence a snarling, snatching sound, almost like a dog quarrelling. Mr. Rochester, putting down his candle, said to me, "Wait a minute," and he went forward to the inner apartment. A shout of laughter greeted his entrance, noisy at first, and terminating in Grace Poole's own goblin ha-ha. She then was there. He made some sort of arrangement, without speaking, though I heard a low voice address him. He came out and closed the door behind him. "Here, Jane," he said, and I walked round to the other side of a large bed, which with its drawn curtains concealed a considerable portion of a chamber. An easy chair was near the bed head. A man sat in it, dressed with the exception of his coat. He was still, his head leant back. His eyes were closed. Mr. Rochester had the candle over him. I recognized in his pale and seemingly lifeless face the stranger Mason. I saw too that his linen on one side and one arm was almost soaked in blood. "Hold the candle," said Rochester, and I took it. He fetched a basin of water from the washstand. "Hold that," said he. I obeyed. He took the sponge, dipped it in, and moistened the corpse-like face. He asked for my smelling bottle, and applied it to the nostrils. Mr. Mason shortly unclosed his eyes. He groaned. Mr. Rochester opened the shirt of the wounded man, whose arm and shoulder were bandaged. He sponged away blood, trickling fast down. "Is there immediate danger?" murmured Mr. Mason. "Poof, no, a mere scratch. Don't be so overcome, man. Bear up. I'll fetch a surgeon for you now myself. You'll be able to be removed by morning, I hope. Jane," he continued. "Sir?" "I shall have to leave you in this room with this gentleman for an hour, or perhaps 2 hours. You will sponge the blood as I do when it returns. If he feels faint, you will put a glass of water on that stand to his lips, and your salts to his nose. You will not speak to him on any pretext, and, Richard, it will be at the peril of your life if you speak to her. Open your lips, agitate yourself, and I'll not answer for the consequences." Again the poor man groaned. He looked as if he dared not to move. Fear, either of death or of something else, appeared almost to paralyze him. Mr. Rochester put the now bloody sponge into my hand, and I proceeded to use it as he had done. He watched me a second, then saying, "Remember, no conversation," he left the room. I experienced a strange feeling as the key grated in the lock, and the sound of his retreating step ceased to be heard. Here, then I was in the 3rd story, fastened into one of his mystic cells. Night around me, a pale and bloody spectacle under my eyes and hands. A murderess hardly separated from me by a single door. Yes, that was appalling. The rest I could bear, but I shuddered at the thought of Graceful bursting out upon me. I must keep to my post, however. I must watch this ghastly countenance, these blue, still lips forbidden to unclose, these eyes now shut, now opening, now wandering through the room, now fixing on me, and ever glazed with the dullness of horror. I must dip my hand again and again in the basin of blood and water, and wipe away the trickling gore. I must see the light of the unsulfured candle wane on my employment, the shadows darken on the rough, antique tapestry around me, and grow black under the hangings of the vast old bed, and quiver strangely over the doors of a great cabinet opposite, whose front, divided into 12 panels, bore, in grim design, the heads of the 12 apostles, each enclosed in its separate panel as in a frame, while above them, at the top, rose an ebon crucifix and a dying Christ. According as the shifting obscurity and flickering gleam hovered here or glanced there, it was now the bearded physician Luke that bent his brow, now St. John's long hair that waved, and anon the devilish face of Judas that grew out of the panel and seemed gathering life and threatening a revelation of the arch-traitor, of Satan himself, in his subordinate's form.